What would you do if the most generous person you had ever met turned out to be the most dangerous? Not dangerous because they threatened you, not dangerous because they asked you to do anything wrong. Dangerous because they asked you the right questions, at the right time, in the right tone, and you answered every single one of them honestly. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened to a man in Beirut who spent 3 years believing he had finally found someone who wanted to help his community. He had no reason to doubt it. The money was real. The repairs were real. The children who attended the programs were real. The families who received medical help were real. The man who funded all of it was not who he said he was. There is a city in the world where trust is not given, it is earned, tested, and still considered temporary. That city is Beirut. In Beirut, a stranger offering money without conditions is not seen as generous. He is seen as someone who has not yet revealed what he wants. That understanding is not cynicism, it is survival. It is a lesson the city teaches with consequences. Sheikh Hassan al-Madani had learned it the way most people in Beirut learn things, by watching what happened to people who forgot it. He had lived in the southern suburbs for his entire life. He had buried men who trusted the wrong people. He had counseled families whose sons had been recruited into networks they did not fully understand until it was too late to leave. He was 51 years old. He had run his mosque for nearly 2 decades, and he knew exactly what kind of city he was operating in, and none of that protected him. Because the operation that was coming for him did not target his weaknesses. It targeted his strengths. It targeted the fact that he was a man of duty, a man of integrity, a man who had spent his life trying to serve a congregation that needed more than he could ever provide on his own. It targeted the crack in his mosque's eastern wall and the children's program that had no funding, and the families who came to him with medical problems he could not solve. It targeted everything he cared about, and it offered to fix it. The question is not how he fell for it. The question is, how do you not? The crack in the eastern wall had been there for 2 years. Sheikh Hassan had reported it to the municipal office 4 times. He had received 3 estimates and no money. He had watched it widen through one winter and then a second. Every Friday, he stood at the front of his prayer hall and gave his sermon with that crack visible over the shoulders of his congregation. And every Friday, he told himself that next month, somehow, the situation would change. The mosque was not a wealthy institution. It served a neighborhood where 2 different community loyalties met at an invisible line that everyone understood and no one discussed openly. Sheikh Hassan had spent 15 years navigating that line, keeping the mosque neutral enough to serve both sides, committed enough to neither that he had avoided becoming a tool for any faction. That neutrality had a price. It meant that certain sources of funding were not available to him. It meant that the mosque operated on the donations of working families and the goodwill of a community that had very little to spare. The children's afternoon program had been running for 3 years, on the effort of 3 volunteers, and a budget that covered materials only if nothing unexpected happened. The month something unexpected happened, the children went without materials. That was the reality. This was not a secret. Anyone paying close attention to that neighborhood, and certain people always were paying close attention, would have known that Sheikh Hassan was a man who had needs he could not meet through his own resources. They would have known that he was the kind of man who would not accept help from a source that compromised his independence. They would have known that the only way to approach him was through an offer that appeared to ask for nothing. The first phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. The man on the line introduced himself as Faisal. He spoke Arabic with a Gulf inflection, the kind of accent that placed him somewhere between Dubai and Riyadh without being specific about either. His manner was measured, not eager. That was the first thing the sheikh noticed. People who wanted something from him tended to be eager. This man sounded as though he were doing the sheikh a mild administrative courtesy. He explained that his mother had passed away 3 months earlier. She had left behind a will that specified a number of religious institutions in Lebanon she wished to continue supporting after her death. Her instructions were precise. The donations were to be delivered personally, not through intermediaries, and the recipients were to be mosques with active community programs, not political affiliations. Sheikh Hassan's mosque, he said, had been referred to her years ago by a charitable organization in Tripoli that documented small institutions with genuine community roots. Sheikh Hassan listened without interrupting. When Faisal finished, the sheikh asked him a question. How had the Tripoli organization come to know of his mosque specifically? Faisal had a specific answer. The organization had a network of community contacts across northern and southern Lebanon. A woman who had received medical assistance through a program the mosque had briefly run in the mid-90s had mentioned the institution. Her name, Faisal said, was available if the sheikh wanted to verify it. The sheikh said he would think about it. Faisal said he understood completely and that there was no urgency. He would call again in a few days if the sheikh had no objection. He called back on Thursday. The offer, when Faisal laid it out in full, addressed the Eastern Wall, the children's program, and a third problem the sheikh had not mentioned to anyone outside his closest circle: 3 families in the congregation who needed medical assistance that the neighborhood clinics could not provide and that the families could not afford elsewhere. $15,000 for structural repairs. $2,000 per month for community programs. A contact within a medical referral network that operated across Beirut. No conditions stated, no ideology discussed, no reciprocal obligations named. Sheikh Hassan asked the one question that should have ended everything, and did not. He asked why his mosque. Faisal said simply because his mother had been specific, and he was honoring her wishes, and a mosque that served a neighborhood without political alignment was precisely what she had believed was worth preserving in Lebanon. It was the right answer. It was the answer that addressed exactly the thing the sheikh valued most about his own institution. And the fact that it was the right answer, perfectly calibrated, perfectly timed, was the thing that should have alarmed him most. It did not alarm him, because the answer was also true, in the way that good deceptions are always built around something true. His mosque was neutral. His mosque did serve the community without political alignment. Those things were real. The answer acknowledged them. And when someone accurately sees the thing you have spent your life trying to build, you do not typically suspect them of having studied you. You feel, against your own better judgment, understood. The money arrived within the week. The contractor who came to assess the Eastern Wall said the repair would take 10 days. It took 8. And somewhere in a city that was not Beirut, in an office that had no name on the door, a file was opened. At the top, in careful notation, was the name of a mosque, a neighborhood, and a man who had just decided to trust a stranger. The file did not record what Faisal had given. It recorded what Faisal had been sent to find. Faisal visited Beirut for the first time 6 weeks after the Eastern Wall was repaired. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, unannounced but not unexpected. He had mentioned during a phone call the previous week that he might be passing through the city on business and would like to see the repair work if the sheikh was available. The sheikh had said yes. He had, without fully deciding to, begun looking forward to the visit. That is worth pausing on. A man who had spent his adult life developing instincts about Beirut, about strangers, about the true cost of generosity. That man had begun looking forward to a visit from someone he had known for less than 2 months. Not because his instincts had failed him, because the operation had been designed to satisfy them. Faisal arrived with the receipt for the monthly contribution and a question about the children's program. He wanted to know how many children were attending regularly, what materials they were using, whether the volunteer, coordinators needed anything specific. His interest was specific without being intrusive. He drank tea. He complimented the repair work on the Eastern Wall. He asked whether the contractor had done a clean job or left issues behind. Then, in the middle of a conversation about plaster and foundation work, he asked whether there were any new families who had recently joined the congregation. The sheikh answered. There were 4. 1 had relocated from a neighborhood further south. 2 were cousins who had moved to the area for work. 1 was a family whose circumstances were not entirely clear, but who attended regularly and seemed sincere. Faisal nodded. He asked, in the same tone he had used to discuss the plaster, whether the family whose circumstances were unclear had any particular needs the program might address. The sheikh said he would find out. He did not register the question as unusual. A donor asking whether new congregation members had unmet needs fit the established pattern of the relationship. It was attentive. It was responsible. It was precisely the kind of question that a man honoring his mother's charitable wishes would ask. It was also, stripped of its framing, a request for an intelligence profile of an unknown family in a sensitive neighborhood. The visits continued twice yearly. The phone calls continued monthly. And across those contacts, a pattern developed that Sheikh Hassan would only understand in retrospect. If understanding is even the right word for what happens when a man revisits 3 years of his own memory and finds a different map underneath the one he thought he had been reading. Faisal asked about newcomers to the mosque. He asked about young men who attended for a few months and then stopped. He asked about families that had experienced sudden changes in circumstance, income, movement, activity. He asked about community members who seemed to have associations outside the neighborhood that they did not discuss openly. These were not the questions of a curious donor. They were the questions of someone constructing a social architecture, mapping the invisible connections of a congregation that sat at the intersection of a very specific geography in a very specific city. Every answer Sheikh Hassan gave added a data point. Every data point connected to others. The file that had been opened when Faisal made his first phone call was growing into something that an intelligence analyst could read like a census of a world that did not officially exist. The Sheikh was not providing secrets. He did not have secrets in the conventional sense. He was providing something more valuable, ground-level human detail about a community that no technical surveillance could fully capture. Who had arrived, who had left, who was connected to whom, who was present and unexplained. He was providing it honestly, carefully, and with the genuine belief that he was helping a charitable man understand where his money was most needed. 14 months into the operation, something happened that very nearly ended it. During a phone call on a Thursday evening, Faisal referenced a family in the congregation by name. Not a family the Sheikh had mentioned recently. Not a family that had come up in any of their recent conversations. A family that had been part of the congregation for several years, and that Sheikh Hassan had not discussed with Faisal in any context he could immediately recall. The Sheikh stopped. He asked carefully how Faisal knew this particular family. There was a pause. Not a long pause, a fraction of a second, the kind that most people would not register. Sheikh Hassan registered it. Faisal said that a contact within the medical referral network had mentioned the family as potentially needing assistance and had flagged them through an internal channel. He said he had meant to raise it earlier but had forgotten, and he apologized for the confusion. The explanation was plausible. The medical referral network was real. Sheikh Hassan had used it himself, and the contact Faisal referenced was a name the Sheikh recognized. The explanation placed the knowledge in a context that made sense. But the pause had happened, and Sheikh Hassan, who had spent his life in a city where the length of a pause before an answer was a form of information, had heard it. He did not confront Faisal. He did not end the relationship. He did not immediately reach a conclusion. What he did was something quieter and more consequential. He began paying a different kind of attention. Here is what the script has not told you yet. Hezbollah's internal security apparatus had flagged Faisal's visits within the first 8 months of the operation. Not the full picture, not the complete architecture of what was happening, but enough. A man of Gulf appearance, making regular contact with a mosque in a sensitive neighborhood, asking questions that a charitable donor had no operational need to ask. That pattern had been noted, reported, and assessed, and the decision that came back was not to intervene. This is the moment that reframes everything that came before it. Hezbollah's counterintelligence analysts understood that if they moved too early, they would reveal the extent of their surveillance capability to whoever was running Faisal. They would burn a window they had worked to open. They would also lose the opportunity to understand the full scope of what was being collected and why. So they made a tactical decision that Sheikh Hassan knew nothing about. They allowed the operation to continue, under observation, with careful management of what information flowed naturally through the mosque's environment versus what was being quietly shaped. For a portion of the 3 years that Sheikh Hassan believed he was simply answering a donor's questions, the answers he was giving were not unmonitored. Some of what reached Faisal had been allowed to reach him. Some of what Faisal was receiving confirmed things Hezbollah wanted confirmed. That their counterintelligence picture was accurate, that their own networks were clean in specific areas, that Mossad's mapping of this particular neighborhood had gaps that Hezbollah now knew about. The Imam was not simply an unwitting source for one intelligence service. He was the unwitting meeting point of 2 operations running in opposite directions. Both of them were using his honesty as raw material. Neither of them had told him anything. Neither of them intended to. And the fracture that was now developing inside him, the unease he had felt since Faisal named a family he should not have known about, the small, persistent awareness that something in the relationship did not fully add up, that fracture was not going to save him, because the damage from both directions had already been done. What Sheikh Hassan did not know, sitting in his office the evening after that phone call, was how many people were watching the same situation from different positions and had chosen, each for their own reasons, not to warn him. He knew only what he could feel, that a question had been answered too smoothly, that a pause had lasted a fraction too long, that the man he had trusted for over a year knew something he should not have known, and had an explanation for it that was almost too clean. Almost. He sat with that word for a long time. Almost too clean, almost a coincidence. Almost exactly what an honest man would say. He told himself that Beirut made everyone paranoid eventually. He told himself that the medical referral network was a real structure with real contacts, and that information moving through it in unexpected directions was not evidence of anything except the nature of networks. He almost convinced himself. The donations continued arriving. The programs continued running. The children kept coming on weekday afternoons. The congregation kept growing. And somewhere in the city, in an office that Faisal returned to between his visits to Beirut, the file kept filling. And in a different part of the same city, in a building with no external markings, a different set of analysts read their own version of the same file and made notes about what they had allowed Faisal to learn and what they had quietly ensured he had not. Sheikh Hassan was at the center of something. He could feel the edges of it. He could not see the shape. The question he had not yet thought to ask was the one that would have told him everything. Why had the monthly payment arrived without delay, every single month, for over a year, until the one month when it suddenly did not? What changes between the month the money comes and the month it stops? The answer is not about money. It is never about money. The second year began the way the first had ended, with punctual deposits, careful visits, and questions dressed as concern. Sheikh Hassan had not forgotten the pause. He had not forgotten the moment Faisal named a family he should not have known. But he had done what people do with unresolved discomfort when the alternative is disrupting something that is actively helping people they are responsible for. He had filed it somewhere in the back of his awareness and continued. The children's program was running. The medical referrals had helped 4 families in ways the neighborhood's own infrastructure could not have managed. The Eastern Wall stood. He told himself that a man who had delivered on every promise for 14 months had earned a degree of benefit of the doubt. He told himself this carefully and without complete conviction, which is the only way a man like him could tell himself anything he did not fully believe. The visits in the second year followed the same structure. Tea, a practical discussion, a question or two about the congregation. But something in the texture had shifted, not in Faisal's manner, which remained consistent to a degree that was itself slightly unnatural, but in the way Sheikh Hassan listened to his own answers as he gave them. He had begun editing. In small ways he would have been unable to specify, not lying, not withholding anything specific, simply choosing, unconsciously, which details to include and which to let pass unmentioned. He did not recognize this as a protective instinct. He experienced it as discretion, as the natural reserve of a man who had always understood that not every piece of information needed to be shared with every person who asked. What he did not understand was that Faisal's handlers had already anticipated this. They had factored a degree of natural drift into the operational timeline. They did not need the Sheikh to tell them everything. They needed him to tell them enough, across enough time that the picture assembled itself. And he was still doing that. Even with his unconscious editing. Even with the small private reservations he had developed, the file was still growing. In the 4th month of the second year, Sheikh Hassan made a decision that he believed was a test. A family had joined the congregation 6 weeks earlier. The Sheikh knew almost nothing about them. They attended regularly, they were quiet, they had not sought assistance or made themselves prominent in any way. The Sheikh had not mentioned them to Faisal. He wanted to see whether Faisal would ask. It took 3 visits and 2 phone calls. Then, in the middle of a call that had been focused on the children's program budget, Faisal paused in a way that now felt familiar and asked whether there had been any new additions to the congregation recently. His tone was the same tone he always used. Careful, interested without being urgent. Sheikh Hassan said no, nothing significant. A few individuals who had attended once or twice but not returned. Faisal said he understood and moved back to the budget discussion. The Sheikh sat with the answer afterward. Faisal had accepted it without pressure. He had not pushed or redirected. He had simply received what was offered and continued the conversation. That was, the sheikh told himself, not the behavior of someone who already knew the family existed. He spent 2 days convinced he had been wrong to be suspicious, that the pause 14 months earlier had been exactly what it appeared to be, a man searching his memory for which channel a piece of information had come through. That Beirut had, as it always eventually did, made him see threat in ordinary spaces. This was the false release moment, and it was the most dangerous thing that happened to him in the entire 3 years, not because it was manufactured, but because it was genuine. The relief he felt was real. The loosening of his private vigilance was real. And it had not been engineered by Fizzle at all. It had been engineered by his own exhaustion, his own need to believe that the thing which had helped his congregation was also clean. He mentioned the family at the next visit. Not prominently, not as a subject. As a passing detail in a longer answer about the neighborhood's recent changes. He described them as quiet, unconnected to the established social networks, present but unexplained. 3 weeks later, through a chain of connections he would never be shown, that detail reached an analyst who cross-referenced it against a separate intelligence picture and confirmed something that had previously been uncertain. He never knew. He never would. In the 7th month of the 2nd year, the operation nearly ended from the inside. A man named Abu Tariq, one of Fissel's support contacts in Beirut, responsible for maintaining the medical referral network as a functional backstory, made contact with Fissel's handlers and requested an abort. His reasoning was specific. The neighborhood's internal security awareness had increased. A community figure unconnected to Sheikh Hassan had begun asking questions about the provenance of the mosque's renovation funding. Not to the sheikh directly, to people adjacent to him. The questions were casual, the kind that circulate through a neighborhood as ordinary conversation. But Abu Tariq had spent enough time in Beirut to know that casual questions in that context were rarely casual. He assessed that the window was closing, and that the risk of continuing beyond the current intelligence yield did not justify the exposure. The recommendation was reviewed. It was not accepted. The reasoning from the other direction was operational. The file had identified the outline of something significant, but the outline was not yet filled in. 2 more visits, the analysts believed, would confirm what they had assembled into a working theory. Aborting now would leave the central question unanswered. Abu Tariq was told to manage the peripheral noise and continue. He did, but he reduced his own visibility in the neighborhood, which meant that one layer of the backstory, the medical referral contact who could be reached and verified, became slightly less accessible. Sheikh Hassan did not notice this immediately. When he tried to use the referral contact for a family in need 3 weeks later, the response came back slower than usual, through a different channel, with an explanation about personnel changes. He noted it. He did not investigate it. He told himself that charitable networks were informal structures, and that informal structures had irregular rhythms. He was not wrong about that. He was wrong about what explained the irregularity in this case. By the 3rd year, Faisal's visits had taken on a quality that Sheikh Hassan would later describe as frictionless. Not comfortable exactly, something more like inevitable. The relationship had developed its own momentum, its own established vocabulary. When Faisal arrived, the sheikh knew roughly how the conversation would move. He knew which questions were coming and roughly in which order. He had stopped experiencing them as questions at all. He experienced them as the texture of an ongoing relationship, the familiar rhythm of a man checking in on an investment he genuinely valued. This was the most complete success of the operation. Not that Sheikh Hassan had stopped being cautious, but that caution had been slowly reclassified in his own mind. It was no longer something he directed at Faisal. It had become something he directed at the neighborhood, at the political environment, at the general uncertainty of Beirut, the appropriate and customary background anxiety of a man in his position. Faisal had been moved without the sheikh fully noticing from the category of things to be cautious about to the category of things that helped him manage the things to be cautious about. The operation had not simply deceived him, it had been incorporated into his own system of navigation. In the final months before the money stopped, something happened that did not register as significant at the time and would later seem in retrospect like a door that had been left slightly open. Faisal, during a visit that was otherwise unremarkable, asked about a specific young man in the congregation. Not in his usual way, not as part of a broader question about new additions or departures, by name, with a directness that was different from his established pattern. Sheikh Hassan answered. The young man attended regularly. He was connected to a family that had been in the neighborhood for 2 generations. He had, in recent months, developed associations with people outside the neighborhood that the sheikh did not know well. Faisal listened. He did not ask a follow-up question. He moved to a different topic within 30 seconds and the rest of the visit proceeded normally. But the sheikh sat with it afterward in a way he had not sat with anything for months. The question had been too direct. The departure from pattern was too clean, and the speed with which Faisal had moved past it, without pressing, without clarifying, without the natural follow-up curiosity that the answer would have prompted in an honest man, felt like the behavior of someone who had already heard enough. Someone who had asked not to learn something, but to confirm it. He did not contact Faisal in the week that followed. He waited for the next scheduled call. It came. Faisal sounded exactly as he always sounded. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and covered the children's program, the approaching winter maintenance needs, and a brief exchange about the neighborhood's general condition. Nothing was different. Nothing was out of place. Every answer landed where it should, and Sheikh Hassan, who had spent his life in a city that taught its residents to distrust what was too clean, sat in his office after the call ended and understood, without being able to name it, that something had concluded. Not changed, concluded. He did not know what it was. He did not know when it had happened. He did not know whether the conclusion was his or someone else's, or whether it had been reached long before either of them had said a word. He only knew that the question he had been carrying since the first pause, in the first year, on a Thursday evening that now felt like someone else's memory, had not gone away. It had only gotten quieter. And in Beirut, things that went quiet did not disappear. They waited. The deposit did not arrive on the first of the month. Sheikh Hassan waited 3 days before calling. This was itself a decision. A small act of discipline, a refusal to appear dependent on something he had told himself he was not dependent on. When he called, the line rang without answer. He noted this without interpreting it. He called again 2 days later. Someone picked up, spoke briefly in Arabic with an accent he had never consciously analyzed before, and told him Faisal was traveling. He had been told Faisal was traveling before, twice in 3 years. Both times, Faisal had called within the week to apologize for the gap in communication and to ensure the administrative matters were in order. This time, no call came. The children's program ran that month on reserves the sheikh had quietly maintained since the second year. A small fund set aside in the account separate from the mosque's main finances, built from modest surplus across several months. He had not told anyone why he was keeping it. He had told himself it was general prudence. Looking back later, he would understand it differently. Somewhere below his conscious reasoning, he had been preparing for the relationship to end in a way he was not allowed to predict. The program ran. The congregation did not notice anything had changed. This was the first consequence, invisible, structural, already in motion, of the fact that the operation had embedded itself so thoroughly into the mosque's infrastructure that its absence required active management to conceal. Abu Salim arrived on a Friday, 6 weeks after the last payment. He came with 2 other men during the period between the afternoon prayer and the evening prayer, when the hall was quiet and the volunteers were cleaning up the children's materials from the afternoon session. He did not introduce himself with a title or an affiliation. He did not need to. The way the remaining worshippers read his presence and found reasons to be elsewhere told Sheikh Hassan everything about who had sent him. They went to the sheikh's office. The door was closed. One of the 2 other men remained outside it. Abu Salim did not begin with accusations. He began with information, a precise sequential account of the relationship between Sheikh Hassan and a man known to the sheikh as Faisal, laid out in chronological order, with a specificity that made the extent of the surveillance clear without Abu Salim needing to state it explicitly. He described conversations. He described visits. He described the questions that had been asked and, with less specificity but unmistakable implication, the uses to which the answers had been put. He told the sheikh that the young man whose name Faisal had asked about directly, in that final visit, the young man connected to a 2-generation family, with new associations outside the neighborhood, had disappeared from the area 10 days after that conversation. He did not say what had happened to him. He did not need to. Sheikh Hassan did not speak for a long time. When he did, he asked one question, whether there was any indication that Faisal had known from the beginning what the sheikh did not know. Abu Salim said yes. From the beginning. The sheikh asked whether the Syrian official, Major Karim, who had arrived with documents and a determination of legitimacy, had been part of the same operation. Abu Salim said yes, staged specifically for the Sheikh, at the point in the timeline when the operations analysts had assessed that his natural uncertainty was approaching a threshold that required external resolution. Sheikh Hassan sat with that for a moment. The thing that had reassured him most, the institutional verification that had answered his doubts at precisely the right moment, had been manufactured for the purpose of answering those doubts. His instincts had been correct, and the operation had prepared for his instincts in advance. He said quietly that he had never written anything down, never taken a photograph, never transmitted anything through any channel other than ordinary conversation. Abu Salim said that he understood this, and that it did not change what had been built from those conversations. The intelligence Mossad assembled through Sheikh Hassan's 3 years of honest answers did not expire when the operation ended. A file of that nature, mapping the social infrastructure of a neighborhood, tracking the movement of individuals through a congregation's ecosystem, identifying the points where a recruitment network intersected with civilian community life, does not become less useful when the source goes dark. It becomes a foundation. It is cross-referenced against other sources, updated through other channels, used to orient future operations toward the gaps it has identified. The specific intelligence about the young man who disappeared was one data point in a larger picture. The picture had been built across dozens of conversations, across 3 years, and it covered not just the mosque, but the extended network of relationships that radiated from it, the families, the associations, the patterns of presence and absence that a congregation generates without knowing it is generating anything at all. Several individuals who had passed through the mosque's environment during those 3 years were subsequently displaced, relocated, or simply absent from the neighborhood in ways that were noted but never officially connected to the operation. The connections existed, they were never public. In intelligence work, the distance between cause and documented consequence is maintained deliberately. It is part of the architecture. The operational model itself, the charity as access structure, the legitimate institutional funding combined with carefully framed social mapping questions, the manufactured verification layer, was not retired with this case. It was, by the nature of what it had produced, validated. Variations of it appear in documented cases across multiple countries and multiple target communities. The specific execution belongs to this operation. The methodology belongs to a much longer history. The mosque was not closed. Sheikh Hassan was not arrested. Hezbollah's internal review, as Abu Salim had indicated it would, concluded that he had acted without knowledge of Faisal's true purpose. In the formal sense, the matter was resolved. In every other sense, it was not. The mosque was categorized internally as a compromised location. This was not announced. It was not posted anywhere. It was simply a classification that existed within the relevant security apparatus, and it meant that the mosque was no longer used for any communication or coordination that required discretion. New worshippers who appeared without established community ties were screened before being allowed to become regular attendees. This screening was conducted without their knowledge and without the sheikh's direct involvement, which meant that his congregation was being managed around him by people he could not identify, using criteria he was not given. He understood this was happening. He did not ask for details. Asking for details would have required acknowledging a degree of operational awareness he was not supposed to have, and it would not have changed anything. The children's program was discontinued. The official reason was administrative. The real reason was that the program had been funded by Faisal's money, and everything Faisal's money had touched was now structurally compromised, not because the program itself had done anything wrong, but because its origins could not be cleanly separated from the operation that had funded it. The children whose families had been helped through the medical referral network were helped through different channels going forward. The volunteers who had run the afternoon sessions were quietly redirected. A Lebanese journalist, working from a source that was never identified publicly, published a story about an unnamed imam in a southern suburb who had accepted substantial foreign donations without adequate verification of their origin, and whose institution had subsequently been assessed as having inadvertently provided access to external intelligence actors. The story named no names. It described no specific incidents. It was, in the way of such stories, precise enough to be understood by the people it was intended to reach, and vague enough to be unactionable by anyone else. The people it reached included several families in the congregation who had known Sheikh Hassan for over a decade. 2 of them stopped attending within the month. Others stayed, but with the particular quality of distance that a community develops around something it no longer fully trusts. Not hostility, not accusation, simply a recalibration of proximity, a slight reduction in what was shared, what was discussed, what was brought to the sheikh when something needed to be brought to someone. He noticed. There was nothing he could do with the noticing. The eastern wall of the mosque still stands. The repair work was done by a contractor who was paid with money that came from a man whose real name Sheikh Hassan never learned, in service of an operation whose purpose Sheikh Hassan never agreed to serve. The wall does not know this. The crack it replaced does not know this. The material record of the operation is a repaired foundation and a closed file in a building somewhere that has no name on the door. What remains in the neighborhood is harder to categorize. It is the specific quality of a community that has learned, without being taught directly, that something it trusted was not what it appeared to be, and that the man at its center had answered every question without knowing he should have stayed silent. He still leads Friday prayers. The hall still fills. He still answers the questions that come to him, because that is the function he has served his entire adult life, and because the alternative is not silence. The alternative is a kind of withdrawal that would confirm permanently something he is not willing to confirm. Beirut has always known that trust is a liability. Sheikh Hassan always knew this too. He knew it the morning of the first phone call. He knew it when the money arrived. On time every month for 3 years. He knew it in the pause he heard during a Thursday evening call, and in the directness of a question about a young man who would later disappear. He knew it, and it was not enough. That is not a story about naivety. It is a story about the specific distance between knowing something and being protected by knowing it. In the work of intelligence, that distance is not a flaw in the target. It is the operational terrain. The file is closed. The operation is over. Sheikh Hassan is still in Beirut, in a mosque where the walls are solid, in a neighborhood that remembers. If this kind of operation interests you, the ones that leave no official record but reshape the ground beneath the people who lived through them, this channel covers them, deeply, carefully, and without simplifying what is not simple.